Nowadays, you can learn so much online, it really is amazing. Just whip out your smartphone, search some drum lessons. You can find thousands of helpful drum lessons for you to become a better drummer. Now, the only problem with that is if we're only a self-taught drummer where we're only looking online, you're probably gonna run into some common pitfalls and mistakes. So in this lesson, I wanna talk about the 5 common pitfalls of self-taught drummers. Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Eric with FisherDrumming.com. Good to be back with you on the next lesson here. If you're new to the channel, hit subscribe, and if you guys enjoy this video, then give it a thumbs up. All right, so let's get into the 5 common pitfalls that self-taught drummers are making. So the number one thing I would say that is the most common is skipping over key fundamentals in drumming. Okay, missing out on some of those things that are gonna be building a solid foundation on the drums. If you leave out certain key fundamentals of drumming, you're never going to be as good as you can be. You're not going to be building on a solid foundation. Okay, some of these things would be not learning the core rudiments and not having them memorized and internalized and just part of your vocabulary. That would be a super common mistake. And drummers get excited, they start to learn some beats and they just wanna stay in the beat world and just learn music, and that's awesome. But if you never learn the vocabulary of drumming, how can you really speak it authentically and creatively? You're not going to be able to communicate yourself on the drums to the best of your ability. You're gonna hit a wall and you're gonna be always stuck in kind of a really basic level of drumming. So, gotta learn the rudiments. Now, singles and doubles are the most basic foundational rudiments of all the others, but that doesn't mean you need to stop there and that's the only 2 that you need to know. Okay, so I would say at least know and practice and have down these 15. The 5-stroke roll, the 6-stroke roll, the 7-stroke roll, the 9-stroke roll, the 10-stroke roll, the single paradiddle, the double paradiddle, the triple paradiddle, the paradiddle diddle, the flam tap, the flam accent, and the hurta. So if you really get to know those rudiments, you practice them, you internalize them so that you can recall them at any moment and naturally just be fluid with those rudiments and play them in different subdivisions, you're going to have a world of creativity and different ideas on the kit. So that is so important. Now, if you really had to boil it down even further than those 15, I would say study these 5. Besides the singles and the doubles, it would be the 5-stroke roll, the 6-stroke roll, the single paradiddle, the paradiddle diddle, and the flam. So if you're gonna condense that 15 down into just 5, I would say that would be really even more of a core group that you wanna study and learn first. Now, some other key fundamental skills that you don't wanna miss out on would be reading and writing drum notation. Drum notation is so helpful to know because sometimes when you're listening to a drum part, it's so hard for you to really capture and break it down in bite-sized pieces with just what you're hearing. But if you have it written out and you can look at one individual note at a time, suddenly it's not so complicated. Now you can really break it down into bite-sized pieces and learn the part the most efficient way. So there's nothing like being able to read drum notation. Even if you're just at the basic level, it's still going to be extremely helpful. Now, another very common pitfall is the problem of unbalanced hands. This is something that every drummer has to deal with at some point. All of us have a strong hand and a weaker hand. Okay, so you're gonna have a dominant hand and a hand that you have to spend twice as much time to get to act like your dominant hand. We all have to deal with that. Now, many self-taught drummers just kind of skip over that. They don't learn the training exercises and how to get balanced hands. So I wanna spend a little time talking about that. Don't be content with just having a slow left hand. Practice playing unison notes, singles and doubles at the same time. Try to mirror your left hand to your right hand so that you can see where your form is lacking in your left hand and what you need to do to fix it. Also, make sure that you're practicing rudiments evenly on both hands. Don't just always lead with your right hand and leave your left hand to always play catch up. There's simple things you can do, and I've done a lot of videos on exercises to help your weaker hands, so check that out. Make sure, guys, if you're doing regular rudiment practice, these things are gonna surface and you're gonna have to deal with it. So that kind of goes hand in hand with making sure you're practicing your rudiments. And there's a really simple way you can just get better at that, and that's by incorporating rudiment practice at the beginning of your practice session. So make sure you set aside about 10 minutes of warm-up time where you're just going through these rudiments and you really can hyper focus on getting those rudiments to sound very good and getting your left hand or whatever weaker hand you have to be improved more like your dominant hand. All right, so let's move on to point number 2 out of the 5 common pitfalls, and this one is having a poor sense of time on the drums. So you can't keep a consistent beat, a consistent tempo on the drums. Now this is super duper common. We've all gone through this. We all have to work on this. It is a skill you do have to learn and you do have to practice to get better at. But it is something that I think a lot of drummers aren't aware of how bad they really are until they start playing to a click all the time. And that's a simple fix right off the bat. Start playing to a metronome consistently, every practice. So if you're working on something, put a metronome on so that you can keep yourself accountable. And there are a lot of good metronome apps. Find one that works for you. There's also some other methods that I want to go over that are some newer, more helpful things than even just listening to a click. And one of those is feeling the pulse. And there is a watch that is created by Soundbrenner called the Pulse. And this is a very cool watch because it actually pulses the tempo that you set. And so instead of hearing the click in your ear, you actually get to feel it. So you can set the pulse by tapping it, and it starts pulsing the time. It's a pretty strong vibration. So I would definitely check out this helpful metronome watch if you guys want to develop that sense of time and get better at feeling it. The link down in the description below will give you more information on that. Okay, so moving on to point number 3, the third pitfall is poor technique. Yes, there is technique in playing the drums. It's not just picking up some wooden sticks and smashing around and making a bunch of noise. It's kind of like that, but it's also, a skill and an art, and you have to learn how to do it correctly if you want to be good at it, and if you want to sound good, and if you want to have some real good feel on the drums. So what most drummers struggle with is when they are playing the drums, they're way too tense. And this is just something that even experienced drummers who've been drumming for a long time still struggle with. They're just like rigid. And what happens is when you're tight and rigid, it inhibits you from having that fluidity and being able to play, more complex things on the drums. It also sounds rigid. It also sounds like you're forcing things or you're just not smooth. And so if you want to sound better and you want to be able to play more complex things on the drums, you have to loosen up. You have to have this nice, relaxed technique when you're playing. And there are techniques that will help you to utilize the rebound of your stick better, like the molar technique. There are techniques that will help you utilize your finger movements a lot better, like the throw catch method. They call it different things, but you want to be able to utilize your hands in the full capacity. So you have your wrists, you have your fingers, you have your arm, you have your elbow joints, your shoulder. All of this is involved in playing the drums, as well as your foot too. There's so much we can go over, and I cover that a lot deeper in the free masterclass that I have going on, and also in the fundamentals drumming course that's on my website. But a few things I would say is, first, you need to sit at the drum set, be relaxed, let your shoulders relax, make sure you're at the right height on your drums. Don't sit too low where you're stressing your hip flexors. Sit high enough where you can easily play and lift up your leg to hit the kick pedal. Also, your arms, you shouldn't have to have your shoulders shrugged when you're playing your snare. Your shoulders should be able to be relaxed. Now, quickly, I'm going to give you a rundown on how to hold your stick for better performance. There are different stick grips. You have German, American, French. Now, all of those can be utilized for specific reasons on the drums or hand positions that you're going to be playing. But I would say you want to have a nice neutral grip that is going to allow your stick to freely move and get the full dynamic range, and also be in line with your arm. So if I grab my stick here, if I hold my stick like this, like the German grip, I don't like how the direction on my stick is pointed out so far this way when my forearm is right here. If I can flip my stick to be a little bit more in line with my arm, now it's working as an extension of my arm. It's going to be much easier to control that stick because now as my forearm moves, the stick is going to naturally move with it. It's an extension of my hand. Now your stick grip is so important because this is how you're going to be controlling the stick with your fingers as well. So look at how I'm holding the stick on the bottom here. I'm not holding the stick mainly with my first two fingers. I'm actually holding the stick mainly with my middle finger and my thumb, and that's my fulcrum finger. My index finger is almost just a guide. It's just resting on top of the stick. I'm also not squeezing my stick all the way up to my palm here where there's no gap at all. Okay, I'm leaving a little bit of a gap here so that my stick has some room to move inside my hand. These are all helpful things because when you get to bigger strokes, you want to have some room there in your hand, and you want to let the stick naturally rebound. When you hit it, it's going to come up, and you want to have some room there for your stick to come back up. Also, my fingers on the back of the stick are on the stick. I'm not letting my pinky fly off or my ring finger fly off and only use these three fingers. I'm fulcruming middle finger, have my index finger kind of resting on the stick. My back two fingers are curled around the back of the stick to control the rebound. So depending on what voice you're playing on the drums, if you're playing your ride cymbal, it might feel a lot more natural to be in a French position where your thumb is pointing up and you have really good finger control on your ride. But if you're playing on your hi-hat, crossing your body like this, it's going to feel a whole lot more natural and better for your stick movement, for the top of your hand to be facing up in that American grip like that. Not in the German grip where your stick is pointing out this way. You're going to be in a weird position. So you want to have your stick in line with your forearm, remember, but you want to be able to see the top of your hand. And for me, that works much better when I'm playing my hi-hat. I have a lot of control, and I have really good finger and accent control in this neutral grip right here. Now, for the sake of time, I can't get into everything regarding technique in your stick grip and in your finger control and the different techniques of how to throw your stick. But if you want more information on that, please check out the 30-minute free training that I have going on right now in the link down below. It is a completely free training that you can stream and watch at any time. There are some scheduled time slots available. It's a webinar. There is a chat box. A lot of drummers are taking advantage of that right now. It's a free resource where I do get into more depth on these different stick techniques and different stick grips. So make sure you check that out. But the quick takeaway from this is make sure that you are not tense when you're playing. You have to go back to the pad and really reteach yourself if you've developed some bad habits of playing with bad technique over the years. It's going to take some time to unlearn those bad habits and relearn new ones. But I promise it's worth it because your drumming will improve from it and you'll have a lot more fun and fluidity around the kit. Now let's talk about point number 4 of these pitfalls, and this one is poor dynamics. So many drummers have one volume that they play at, and it's loud usually, and they don't know how to have a dynamic range in their playing. So dynamics means how loud and soft you play. If you're one of those drummers that never thinks about that, chances are you're probably usually playing just one volume, and you need to be more conscious of what you're playing and when to play in a different dynamic range. So especially in music, a lot of music, you're going to have a nice ebb and flow, right? The choruses are usually the big, louder parts of the song, more energy, and usually in the verses, you're going to be playing quieter, pocket. That's not always the case, but that's definitely the case with a lot of music. So you want to be conscious of that. You're going to be a more musical drummer if you can be a dynamic drummer. So now this also comes into play in how your individual notes are within your overall groove. The ghost notes need to be played at an extremely low volume for your groove to sound good. The reason they're called ghost notes is because you're not supposed to really hear them, but you're supposed to feel them. You want to think of them as they're just the filler notes that give it the feel. So another example of this is how are you articulating your notes on your hi-hat in a groove. Sometimes a groove calls for just straight eighth notes where every note sounds exactly the same. But other times you need to have a pulse, and you need a pulse on the downbeat quarter note, and you need to ghost those other notes. So for example, I'm going to play straight eighths on my hi-hat in this groove. See how all those notes were consistent and even? Now here's the same exact groove, but this time I'm gonna pulse the quarter note. It totally adds a different feel to the groove, and those are those things that you need to be aware of. How are you articulating your notes, and are you using internal dynamics within the groove? So you have your overall dynamics, how loud and soft you're playing, or something like this. Very different dynamic levels, very different articulations. So those are things that you need to be aware of in your playing. So again, back to the snare, let's just be aware of the difference of our ghost notes to our accented backbeat notes. So off the top of my head, I'm just gonna play a cool groove. Here we go. The groove would sound way different if all of those ghost notes were loud. Something like that. Way too busy, way too much. So when you're thinking ghost notes, think of dropping your stick as your stick is just an inch above the snare. You're just dropping it, and you're controlling that drop of the stick. You're not using your wrist at all to hit down and make a loud note. So think of that difference between ghost notes and your regular backbeat notes. And finally, we have the fifth pitfall that you want to avoid. So number 5 is no practice method or no organized way to practice. So the worst thing you could do is sit down at the drums and have no game plan and just jam and dilly-dally and fiddle and noodle around the drums. Now, we all need to do that and just have fun. And of course, noodle away at certain times. But if you don't have any practice method, and if you don't have a clear path on what you need to work on, then you'll just kind of float around on the drums and you won't really see great improvement over the course of a year. And I look back on my drumming path, and the times when I've noticed the most improvement is when I actually just had a specific, meaningful practice session for a long period of time, for a consistent period of time. Now, I learned this actually through my own personal experiences, and I squandered a lot of practice time when I was younger. I used to have a lot more time, we all do when we're younger, and I would play the drums a lot, but it's crazy because when I actually became a point in my life where I had less time to practice, but I got better in that period of time so much faster than in the time when I had more time, but I was squandering my practice time. And I realized it's just the focus difference and what I focused on and what I spent my time doing. So what I realized is putting restrictions on yourself is not necessarily a bad thing. Having minimal practice time doesn't mean you can't become a good drummer. It's actually going to help you focus on what's most important. So what you want to do is pretend that you only have 15 minutes to practice. So how would you break up those 15 minutes? If you only had 15 minutes, what is the most important thing that you would need to practice? That doesn't always mean it needs to be the same exact thing you practice. It depends where you're at and what you need to work on at that current time. Sometimes you need to really focus on your weak links. If you want to get better, you have to remember you're really only as good as your weakest link. That was a saying I think I learned in drumline when we had a line of drummers and you have to all sound like you're one unit. Well, we can't sound like we're all on the same level if Bobby over there never learned how to play 16th notes at 200 BPM. If he was still stuck at 150, well, we'd all be, suffering for his lack of practice. We wouldn't be one unit. Bobby screws it up for everybody. He's the weak link, and he's going to keep the line sounding like a unit. So that's the way you need to look at yourself. What is my weakest link? What's holding me back from sounding like I'm one unit? So if your left hand sucks and your right hand's really good, you need to work on your left hand. And I would say put all of your focus on your left hand. Don't even worry about anything else until you really start focusing on your left hand, getting that up to par. Treat it like it's do or die, like you have to do this one thing or else you can't play drums anymore. Like, just make a point to say, I'm going to laser focus in on my weaknesses, and I'm going to do it consistently. And it doesn't mean you have to do it for 2 hours, okay? It just means that you have to consciously have no distractions, and for a set point of time, make sure that you're practicing on that weak link. And once you get that one improved, then you move on to the next one. Another thing to think about is your musical abilities, how good you are at playing to the music and coming up with musical drum parts and being a player for the music. That's another side of drumming that you want to have some focus on. You want to think about the fundamental rudiment training that we talked about, right? So you want to have that point of focus down. You also want to think about creativity on the drums. Some ways that you can be more creative in your fills and vocabulary is focusing on linear style fills and patterns and phrases. So that might be something you want to spend time focusing on in your drumming. Another focus of your practice might be consistent groove and consistent time in your grooves. So those are just a few examples of focus in your practices. What you want to do is write down what you want to work on, things that you need to work on, and just try to write it all out and have a game plan. So when you go to your practice, you really have a game plan of what to practice, and then you set limits and you restrict your time. Even if you have a lot of time, pretend like you have to restrict your time and you only have 1 hour. What are you gonna do with that 1 hour, and how are you gonna prioritize it from most important to least important? If you approach practice that way, I promise you're gonna have more growth and more efficiency and effectiveness in your practices than ever before. Now guys, if you want to go even more in depth on some of those points, there's 2 things you can do. You can first check out another huge free resource, and that's the free training webinar that I'm running right now. The link is down in the description below. It covers even more in depth some of these points that I went over. And the next thing you can do is visit fisherdrumming.com, and I would check out the Total Drumming program, where we have a 5-course bundle, and it's a lifetime access membership for a one-time payment or a monthly payment plan that will work for you. So check that out, guys. I hope to see you on the next lesson here on YouTube. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. Make sure to drop a comment down below and a like button. I read all the comments and I love to see what you guys have to say. So I hope you walk away with some value in this lesson, and I'll see you on the next one. Practice and have fun. Later.